and you should be welcome to the 218th episode of podcast Juventus Club Svezia, and this time I have Poul Pedersen with me. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you
Nice
are
to be here.
and you are a part of the Juventus Denmark podcast.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We've been doing that for 10 years or something like that now. So
Yeah, you're a regular podcaster then.
yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have had both Morten and Andrew from your podcast before, and now it's the third member of the podcast.
Yeah, so more or less the entire team. So
Yeah, it was Andrew who told me I should have you on. You are a licensed UEFA license coach and a scout.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to talk about the coaching part of the Juventus club and the scouting too with you.
Yeah, sure.
But first time I have a new guest, I always ask why Juventus for you.
Yeah. So that's also a good question. I think it was more a coincidence as more or less like a young player. I was actually in Italy participating in the football club there in, I think it was back in 94 or 95. And we actually got to see Juventus live. I can't remember if it was playing against Verona or something like that. So and obviously the access to watching football on live TV, at least in Denmark, was more or less reserved for the English matches every Sunday and Saturday. So we didn't really have access to Italian games that much back then. But after seeing them live, I actually tried to dive deeper into what Juventus actually is, and from there on, I really got my fascination about the entire club, lo stilo Juve, and the entire approach to football actually. So that's more or less where I come from in at least in a Juve sense.
Yeah, and we have the same in Sweden, like in Denmark. Then it's almost everything is about Premier League in Sweden too.
Yeah.
But we have in the 90s when I grow up, we have Uno Cruz Due, a program in Sweden who broadcast Serie A. So my thing is Serie A and Juventus, and not like my dad and that generation. It's more Premier League.
Yeah, it's more like it's more like a common thing to be a Premier League fan here in Denmark as well. So it's we're a few and rare people that actually cares about and what's going on there. So yeah.
Yeah, it was the same. Before I have Andrew and Morten, I have Ulrik from the Three Senators.
Yeah.
So you're growing in the culture in Denmark.
We're trying at least, but yeah.
Yeah, and in your opinion, if we are talking about it's 3 games in Serie A left and the Coppa Italia finale, what do you say about the season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would be straightforward to say it's been disappointing, but I don't think it's quite that simple actually. I think there's a lot of internal struggles going on and uncertainties around a new sporting director coming in, wanting to set his new direction and so on. But because clearly Juventus have also seen that there's a need for transition in the way they're doing things, at least from a sporting level, but hopefully also from a commercial level. So I think it's been a season with a lot of uncertainties. I hope and believe that they'll secure the Champions League spot, which is more or less the goal for the season, and then have a good foundation to actually build something new, a new cycle from after the summer vacation. But looking from a playing perspective, it's been more or less a disaster since New Year's. So yeah, I think there are a couple of things in there, and being where the teams actually currently placed, I think it's more down to the lack of quality in the other teams rather than Juventus actually getting the results that they need. Because if you were playing in the Premier League and you didn't win, is it 2 out of 14 matches now? You would be down as number 10 or 12 like that, because the quality among the other teams are that much higher. So you can't pass up on opportunities like that if you want to be a top 4 team. So I think it's more down to the lack of quality on the other teams, that you are actually still in the running for Champions League spot. So
yeah, if you see, I think it's 17 points between Inter and Milan on the first and second place, and that's like our 9 season with the Scudettis. We were dominating the league. Now it's 1 year with Inter. It's not 9 years. But if you the Juventus motto, winning is not important, it's everything that counts. Then we are spoiled with that. We win titles every season, and now we are without titles every season. So it's the quality of the league, as you say. Milan, Juventus, and then we have Bologna, and we have Atalanta, Roma, and such. But if we are less of quality this season and we are still in third place, it's the Serie A who are up to the quality as we are used to.
Yeah, exactly. And you can even see the champions from last season still trailing a lot in England. That I don't think that would happen in a lot of cases, but that kind of inconsistency is actually something a lot of teams are actually struggling with. So yeah, so luckily for you, that also means on the other side of the summer, I wouldn't say easy, but the distance from being playing mid-level football like they are now, and then to being someone who can actually compete for the Scudetto again. Perhaps there's quite a distance to Inter right now, but in terms of the other teams, the distance isn't really that big. So you can do a faster transition than being in a league where all the teams are actually trying to push into top 4, because that's not happening in Italy. So from that point of view, I think the upside is that it doesn't take that much to get back on track in Serie A.
Yeah, and if we count the last season, we see Inter in Champions League final, we see Roma, we see Fiorentina in Europa League and Conference League. Now this season we see Atalanta for the first European final since the beginning of the club, and we see Fiorentina in the Conference League final again. So we see the Italian teams are good in the European competition, but still you don't see the big teams like Juventus, Inter, Milan go far in Champions League nowadays.
No, I think it's also down to 2 things. Obviously, the teams in the Champions League are somewhat of another quality compared to Europa League and Conference League, but it's also down to, and I think you can see that from the league table as well, that it's very demanding playing on 3 fronts. Obviously, the Cup of the League and then a European matches, so you can't prioritize all of them, and you can clearly see that also from the league table. Obviously, Juventus could or Milan and so on could have better results in Europe, playing against a lesser team. At least last year we saw some disastrous things there, but I think it's down to also not having the quality in all 25 members of the squad. So it's actually very demanding also playing on that. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you see the season so far under the third under Allegri this time, uh, do you blame Allegri for everything, or is it the quality of the squad too, or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think to stay in the Euro terminology, it's not that black and white
Yeah, yeah,
actually. Because obviously the coach has an overall responsibility for setting the direction and the approach and so on. But the players do have on-field responsibilities. So a lot of it comes down to obviously the approach given from Allegri, but when you see the matches, you also clearly see that first touches, passes, and so on, we have extremely lot of unprovoked errors in the football matches, and obviously that's not down to a coach setting them up to do that. So I think it's a two-way street, but it's also clear to see that the team, I think, lacked that decisive motivation, and at least you can see from the players that really want to do something with the ball, create something, are at least what I see is a very frustrating approach to the way Allegri wants to play. So playing on counters, being deep in defense and so on isn't very fruitful for players like Yildiz and Chiesa, Vlahovic and so on. And you can just take the matches from New Year's. You basically see Vlahovic every match being very he's more or less mad every match,
yeah.
and calling his team forward and having a very given up approach to things, because obviously the whole setup around the team is what Allegri is doing, and that's not very fruitful for creating play and doing attacking plays as well. So I would I've been playing like a forward as well in my football years, and I would be extremely frustrated having a coach like Allegri, who cares more about not conceding goals than scoring them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And if you talk about the current squad, do you see another formation? We play with 3-5-2, but don't you think we have the players, the squad for like 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 or such?
Yeah, definitely. But I think as a coach, it's not that important how you put the numbers together. It's more like important how you approach the game. So for an attacking formation like 4-3-3 to work, you need a different approach. You need high pressing. You need to have the ambition to defend the ball, or defend by pressing high and regaining possession high in the opponent's field. And I simply don't think Allegri has that mindset. He's more into caring about risks, because obviously that's a risk. You expose your completely own half doing that. So I think it's down to a mentality approach on how you as a coach perceive your style of play, because obviously he could put them in the 4-3-3, but from Allegri's approach, they would still be 10 men outside the box in US half defending. So it doesn't really matter how you add the numbers up. You need to have that kind of approach into gameplay as well, saying that we want an attacking style formation, but we also want an attacking style approach to our play. So,
and if you see a team with, if we add Paul Pogba and we add Nicolo Fagioli to the midfield this season, do you think we could have seen another result?
Yeah, for sure. It's always decisive having quality, and despite what Pogba has done and so on, I think he's still a class midfielder,
Yeah,
and it's hard to deny that. Even the small cameos he did this season just showcased what the team is lacking. Because if you look at Real Madrid, also with an Italian coach, they don't play all out attacking football.
no,
They also are very pragmatic in their approach. They also can play deep in their own defensive half and play on counters. But the key difference is quality, and we simply have too many mediocre players in the team, just to be honest. So obviously, I think that's also one of the approaches or reflections Allegri is doing, is what can I actually do with this team that gets the points, gets the best results, because in the end that's what matters. And obviously, if being a fan, we want to see some attractive football. We don't want to see Juve defending against Monza in 80 minutes on our home turf. But I think looking at Allegri and what kind of coach he is, his main strengths are clearly in the defensive phase. He's not that very good in orchestrating how to play attacking football, and you can see that. You can clearly see that from the game plan. He has this tenure and his last tenure. They're basically the same. He has 4 or 5 varieties of how to create chances. Last time he had Mandzukic, he played a long ball to him and then do a drop off, and a player would run around Mandzukic, or he passed it to Dybala, then saying, Dybala, do some magic. He had Di Maria also do some magic on an individual point, or he passes to the wing backs who do early crosses, and that's basically more or less his game plan. And then everything resolves around that. I think also, actually, speaking of Ancelotti, he said, but Allegri, from an attacking approach, he's more reliant on stars, on creative stars being able to do something on their own rather than orchestrating how you want to play. And I think that's just coming back to your question again about formation. It wouldn't really matter if he put them in a 4-3-3. It's only numbers and positions on the field. You have to work that into the backbone of the team. But how do you want to utilize having these kind of numbers in the field? Where do you want to create your passing play? Where do you want to create your chances and so on? So if you don't change that approach, your formation matters less, I think.
Yeah, and if you're talking about Allegri now, the fans are divided. We see Viking ultras supporting him with banners and such, and they don't want to see Conte, they don't want to see Thiago Motta. But I think, in my opinion, I'm grateful what he did the first 5 years, and I'm grateful for what he did now with the penalty stuff. He put the team together and work man-to-man management, but his kind of football is outdated. And if we're going forward, we can't go with Allegri. So I think every Juventus supporter are grateful for what he has done, but now it's time for a change.
Yeah, I agree. And no matter how you perceive things, you need to acknowledge that Juventus needs to start a new cycle, a new modern cycle. Otherwise, they will never catch up with Inter, and even Milan to some extent, Napoli as well, who's developing their style of play and also their approach. So if you don't want to look into that, I think you're getting lost in transition as well, because that's what's needed. You can't, and I need to be careful what I'm saying, but there's a certain stubbornness in Italian mindsets, and you can see that clearly from all sides. But you need to acknowledge that football is an evolutionary sport.
Yeah.
It's And again, you can look at the Premier League, looking what's happened there. It's getting faster, it's getting more technical, it's getting more about possession, having the ball rather than not having the ball, and it's getting more about creating attacking plays and so on, rather than from an Italian perspective, you have this old mindset around defending is just as important as attacking. Yeah, it was back in the days, but now it's actually more about attacking and what you're doing with the ball when you have it. And obviously that ties into another subject on let's say talent development, because the modern talent development is all about individual skills, all about what you can do with the ball, not without the ball. So so when you see Real Madrid, you see Barcelona and City to some extent as well, getting those really good talents. They do that because they're looking into creating an identity based on attacking football. So obviously that's what development is more about today, and less around how do you how do you make a concrete defense that's happy to play without the ball for 70 minutes in a game. It really doesn't happen. So you need to acknowledge that also from a talent perspective. The talents being developed today aren't interested in being defenders, being that Italian wall, standing in a match 70 minutes without the ball. So clearly a transition is needed, and like you say, Allegri isn't the right one for that. And if you look at the commercial side as well, you will obviously acknowledge they can't go out and buy the superstars they did previously, creating those huge deficits on the commercial side. So you need to further talent development more, and you need a coach that can actually utilize those talents, and you need even a scouting setup. You need youth teams as well, tying into that overall sporting strategy. So again, looking at, let's say, Barcelona or Real Madrid, all the teams have the same tactics. They play the same style of football as the senior side do, even down to, the 9-year-olds, because that's the way you develop talents into the first team, because they know how to play this style of football. They know what's demanded in each position. And also from a scouting perspective, you scout players for a specific system or specific way of playing, rather than what Juve has done for the last couple of years, or more or less the last 10 years. They've been scouting based on opportunities, like they say, opportunities in the market. So we grab that, and then we'll see how we play them. So from an Allegri perspective, again, just making a little fun, you could see they went out buying Pjanic, for instance, the best 10 in the league. He was with Roma back then, and then they put him down as a 6, playing in front of defense. That's two completely different roles. So you buy a player who's actually the best specialist in one place, and you put him down in another place. They did the same with Locatelli. He was the best 8 in the league when they bought him from from Sassuolo, and now he's playing as a 6 again. So
in that part, do you think it's important for Juventus to do the same? We talk about Barcelona with La Masia, to the B team, to the A team. You see the same play, the same system and such. Real Madrid is not the same in that part. They managed to grow talent, but they sold them off before the A team, or like Morata, who were in the A team but then sold. Do you think it's important for Juventus to have the like the Primavera, the next gen, and then up to the A team in the same system, the same kind of coaches in every team? And do you think Giuntoli is the guy who is almost like Ralf Rangnick in Red Bull concern. He went down to the like 9-year-olds and up to the A team. Do you have the same system everywhere?
Yeah, I think that's the approach you would need to acknowledge they need to take, because there are two approaches you can take in the current environment in football. Either you can spend big and yeah, try to create a business based on results. You see PSG doing that in France, because the league isn't very attractive in France either. So you have that one approach where you need to engage the Agnellis more and say, yeah, but you need to just splash the cash every summer to be competitive in Europe, and then face that it's going to be a deficit every year. And obviously there's some financial fair play tying into that as well. Or on the other hand, you need to create a sustainable business model, and the only way for you to do that in the Italian Serie A in environment where you don't have those kind of ridiculous money is to base it of talent and then combine it with some experienced players as well. But in order to create your own talent development, you need to implement that all the way through the club, all the way through thinking football in the same way. Otherwise, you're not going to develop players into to that, and you can see where they're coming from. I think, as far as I can remember, the last 10 or 15 years, they developed Marquisio and then Chiellini as well. That's it, more or less. So from that point of view, you can't have that randomized talent development. You need to focus explicitly on that, and to do that, you need that alignment from the first team to the second team to the youth teams as well, because that talking into scouting, that would make it much easier to scout the right talent, because you know which kind of player he's going eventually to develop into, to be in contention for the first team at least. So if you don't do that, it's just going to be randomized talent development, more or less.
Yeah, and if we're talking about the like 11 years under Andrea Agnelli as a president, we got Beppe Marotta and Fabio Paratici from Sampdoria, a duo. One direttore sportivo and one like chief scout. And then we get rid of Marotta. Paratici get a promotion to sport director. We saw what that gave to us. Then we saw Federico Cherubini in that part, and now we got the Cristiano Giuntoli in that position, and Giovanni Mana is going to leave for Napoli. Do you think Giuntoli is the sporting director who is going to restart Juventus in a successful era?
I think he could be. I think he created something very exciting in Napoli, at least, also on a very tight budget. So I think at least he has the he's shown he has the ability to do that. I think it's more a question of how does management see this? What kind of role do they want to bestow on him? Would he be given the authority to actually do the transition all the way through a club, or do we still face that kind of Italian stubbornness that it needs to be Italian coaches, it needs to be lo stilo you and everything like that, or do they actually try to seize this opportunity as a time to actually redefine what Juve needs to look like for the next 10 or 20 years? I think that's more the question, because there's no doubt about Giuntoli has the ability, has the network, and I think also from what I saw, he would be looking to bring in some of his former staff from Napoli actually to support that. So I see from what he did in Napoli speaks its own language. I think they've been there for yeah, more or less. The years Juve dominated, they've always been there, tightly marking Juve, and from a playing perspective, they've been playing much more exciting football than Juve has those years. Then there's been some other deciding factors, squad width and so on, that made Juve the champions. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you see like historic the club of Juventus, in my opinion, you don't usually buy the superstars. You buy the talent, buy the diamonds in the rough, as you say, like Del Piero from Padova and such. Then we see the Higuain deal, we see Cristiano Ronaldo deal, we see De Ligt deal and such in the latest years. But when we talk about Giuntoli and the 8 years in Napoli, he got like players from League One and such. Do you think he is going to make those deals for Juventus too? Because Napoli and Juventus, it's a huge difference in the piazza, as you say. But do you think he is still doing those deals for Juventus?
Yeah, I think obviously there's a difference in comparing the clubs, but I also think from a fan perspective, you need to acknowledge Juve isn't a European top club anymore.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. We haven't been for years now. So we need to redefine not only the official approach, but also from a mindset perspective, saying what kind of club is Juve actually, and how do we create a sustainable way of existing, comparing or competing against the English teams who has more extensive budgets and so on. So you can't compete on an economical level. So you need a different approach. And obviously, I think there's a difference between Juve and Napoli, but from an approach side, I think it's the same approach he needs to take here. And it all begins with getting the sporting strategy in place, saying where do we want to be in 5 years and how do we build around that with the right coach, with the right players. So everything actually ties into that sporting strategy that's more about what do we want to build rather than, as it's been with for the last 10 or 15 years, what can we actually get? What are the opportunities? So I think that way of seizing the perspective into what do you want to create for the next 5 or 10 years, it's not enough just to say we want to win the Scudetto. Yeah, but then you have to pay 500 million euros in 2 years. It's more about to say how do we compete for the Scudetto while also creating a sustainable way of running a club, running talent development, playing some exciting football that also sustains the way we want to be perceived in the world.
Yeah, and if we talk about the financial situation in the club, we see the losses are less every year. The budget seems to getting better, but the money from, if we go into Champions League next season and the FIFA Club World Cup, it's money for next year, not this summer. We got loss of Alexandro's big salary, but we are going to pay Cristiano Ronaldo almost 10 million euros. If we are going to get Allegri away from the club, we have to pay him. So the transfer budget isn't that big this summer, but we have to get a more depth in the squad because we're playing in every competition. Do you think Giuntoli can make magic of less finances?
Yeah, I think you just need to look at what he created at Napoli, saying he got some very exciting deals for low cost budget there. So I definitely think that's also one of the reasons why he has been brought in to create that kind of framework around Juventus, where you don't buy a Delict for 90 million euros or whatever he cost back then. But you actually create those players more or less yourselves and get back to the framework, like you mentioned, scouting a Del Piero once he was 15 years when he joined, as far as I remember. Yeah, so you don't actually see you were getting those players anymore, and I think Juntali is there to actually create that kind of framework for you to actually scout those players again, so you don't buy them on the high, but growing into a top tier player like they should be.
And if we see like the Pozzo family, who was on Udinese for a long time, they bought Watford in England, they bought, I think it was Granada in Spain, and they have a great scouting network in like South America and Africa. Do you think Juventus, with the next gen team, who is one of, I think, 2 or 3 from the big clubs who have a second team now, do you think we can build a bigger scouting network around the world with Juntali's staff from his former clubs?
I think they have to. I think they have to have a more extensive presence. I'm not so sure about South America, because that's always a kind of a joker, because the mentality to European mentality is somewhat different, and so I think that's more lottery ticket, and I think I think the approach needs to be to define when do you actually want the player in Juventus, and I think the approach, at least from Juventus perspective, doesn't necessarily have to be like Udinese and several of the other smaller clubs that take a chance on a cheap player from South America. I think Juventus could take it a few steps further, saying that, but we want to see them prove themselves in Serie A at least for a season or two, and then pick them off there. I know obviously they'll be more expensive, but that gambling could pay off rather than paying 3-4 million for a player from South America, having wages for 5 years. Then it would make more sense to have certain guarantees around paying, let's say, 20 million for him once he developed 1 or 2 seasons in Serie A. You know, the Dybala deal was actually one of those deals. He was brought in cheap from South America, and then he proved himself in Palermo a couple of seasons, and then Juve picked him off. I know he was more expensive than if they had brought him in from South America, but Juve's game isn't all about talent development and selling them big. We also need to acknowledge that the main goal for Juve is still to win the Scudetto and participate in Europe, being among, I think, at least top 10 in the Champions League. So you can't completely compare that to a lesser team saying, but our main goal is to get as best a placement as we can in the league and hopefully earn some money by selling players big. That's not the aim of you. So certainly tying into that, you need more guarantees from players that you don't have to develop from bottom, but have a certain level when you bring them in. So.
And in your opinion, we see like PSG with Qatar behind them. We see Abu Dhabi group with Manchester City. We see the Saudi Arabian like Prince or such in Newcastle, and the Saudi Pro League who get every player from Europe. When we're talking about the Angeli family, we're talking about John Elkann, the cousin who is CEO of the holding company Exor. Do you think it's sustainable for Juventus that we doing the same thing we've been for all those years, that we don't put in all the money in Juventus. They want it to be a self-sufficient company as itself. They don't put in every euro in the club. Do you think we can still do that, or do you think they are going to take a larger deal in Juventus and put in some money?
I think there's an ongoing consideration in the Agnelli family whether or not to keep Juventus, because they're not, even though they put in a lot of money over the last 10 years, I think they're not fully committed, if I could phrase it like that, because if you look what they're doing in motorsports, they spend around 300-400 billion euros every year doing motorsports. So in comparison to that, I think they also need to acknowledge there's a new reality where you can't, at least the NCAA, you could have the same level of spending in Juventus, but if you want to compete in Europe, there's a new reality where you just need to acknowledge that you need to spend more, at least in the Champions League, the way Inter is also been doing, but perhaps not creating more debt doing it, but that's another discussion. Anyways, I think it's also a time of reflection for the Agnellis on how to approach that. I think if they want to create the sustainable model, and that's also why I think they brought in two people in the management, being very capable on the financial and law side, to clean up more or less, getting the financials in control, and then putting Gentili in on the sporting side, trying to create that new sporting strategy. So I think that's, at least in the management, I see that's just a temporary solution. I think they want to set a new team in the management, perhaps with a couple of old legends being brought in to sustain that, create that real identity, because I also think that's an entire different topic, but I think Juventus has an identity crisis right now. So I think there are several topics that they need to address and get aligned on several levels, actually. So and one of them being, like you asked, does the Agnelli actually want to own Juventus and support that process, or do they want to sell? I think that's an ongoing consideration in Exo.
Yeah, if you see John Elkann and you see our CFO Francesco Calvo to go into the Middle East, and it's reporting like the shirt sponsor and such, but you still got reports from, like, we got Apple or Amazon or such as a shirt sponsor too, but they are searching for sell or a minority the deal of a share of the company. So you see it's an ongoing process, as you said, and you see like Gianluca Ferrero and Maurizio Scanavino, they are president and CEO, but nothing is going to say that they are going to stay. So let's see in the coming month if we got like Del Piero, Chiellini or such in the board, and see what they can do.
I think Italy is a very romantic country, and that also ties into football as well, romance, feelings, and so on. So I think one of the major issues a lot of Italian teams have are that they are still stuck in the past. Want to be very romantic, want to be very poetic and beautiful, and with the ownership, with a very charismatic president and so on. But But if you see in the rest of the world, the other clubs have transitioned into modern companies, which is more or less the reality that they need to face in Italy as well. If you want to evolve, you need to make that transition from a charismatic president into a more company-based structure. And I think that's one of the places that you has actually been pushing development for many years now, but they also need to make the final step into saying if you want to be a European powerhouse again, you need something else, either more commitment from the Agnellis, or you need a different owner structure where you have investments coming in to sustain that turnaround that you need to go through.
And if we're going back to the coaching side, we are an opinion that Allegri is going to leave. It's much reporting about Thiago Motta. Is that a coach that you're comfortable to take in?
I think from what I see, what he's been doing at Bologna, I think he has the right approach from a younger, modern coach in how he wants to play. So I think from that approach, I think it needs to be someone like him. Obviously, you have numerous examples of younger coaches doing well, but you also have some not doing well. You have the Xabi Alonso, for instance, is perhaps the most bright example of a younger coach doing a turnaround at Leverkusen. But you also have let's say Frank Lampard in England, who is more or less a walking disaster as a coach. So you need to do that screening properly, and I think I think I could easily see Motta doing well in Juventus from what he created at Bologna. I think one key thing is that bringing in a new coach like they did with Sarri back in the days, they made the error of not providing him with the kind of players he needs to succeed with in his style of play. So you need to make that consideration. If you bring in a coach like Motta, you need to supply him with the core base of players that can actually facilitate his way of playing. And coming from another tenure with Allegri ball, I think most of these players would have a hard transition into a style of play where you're actually more focused on having the ball rather than not having it. And it's I think not I don't want to I don't want to expose any players, but you have certain players in the team who should never be there because at least from a ball playing perspective, we could let's just name a player like Gatti, for instance. He's a powerhouse from a physical point of view, but with the ball he's more or less a disaster. So I think from that point of view, it's very different player types you need to execute the style of play that Motta actually wants. So I think the key thing is, be it Motta or another coach they select for the post, I think the key thing is to surround him with at least a key group of players that can actually facilitate his way of playing. Otherwise, it would just turn out to be a disaster. And I don't know if they can get 2 or 3 players from Bologna, but that could be a good start, at least. Calfiore, Sexy, and so on. I think if you could get those 2 with Motta, that would be a good start, because you already have some good ball players in the team, at least from an attacking perspective. You have some exciting. You have Vlahovic, you have Chiesa, you have Yildiz, who are all great ball players who want to play attacking football. And you have Fagioli coming back, one of the most technical gifted players in the team. So I think if you could get out players like McKinney, Weah again, I think it was a huge mistake bringing him in. And then, um, centered more around those players who feel very comfortable with the ball and also are able to make those transition runs into spaces which Allegri hasn't really worked on since he took over. I think that needs to be the foundation that he comes in with. That you surround him with a core group of players that can actually facilitate his style of play.
And do you think if we think Thiago Motta is go into Juventus, you talk about Calafiori. Could we send some? It's talking about Tommaso Barbieri and Thiago Diallo to Bologna to make Calafiori come to Turin, but Circe is like 60 to 80 million euros. It's like the same when we got Vlahovic. Do you think it's going? We have to sell like Gleison Bremer to get those players in, and what are going to happen with the defense then?
Yeah, it's a good question on how you're going to make that work, because the 60 to 80 million price tag is obviously because there are Premier Leagues involved. But I think also from a Bologna perspective, again, they're one of those teams who try to make a good result and then sell big. That's kind of their model. So obviously, if you compete against the English team, you can't do that from a financial standpoint. I think the case around Bremer is quite curious. I think he's an elite player in certain circumstances, but I don't see him as an elite player in let's say a four-back with zonal marking. I don't think he's very good in that regard, actually. So I think from a football understanding perspective, I don't think he's as good as some people would like him to be. I think in the back three where he's doing man marking, I think he's superb, the best in Serie A by a mile. But looking at a tactical point of view, if you want to play possession football where you have built up from the back, he needs to add something different to that. Also, both in a term of building the play from the back, but also if we go back to the 4-3-3 formation again, having high pressure, having the defense with the high line there, you also need some very tactical aware players. I think Guardiola said the first trait he's looking at from a defender is, can you dribble with the ball? Because if you can manage on your own with the ball, we can teach you the other things. So, and I think the main trait from Bremer is not on the ball. It's more or less his physical presence and one-to-one play. So I think there's a tactical consideration that could lead him into being sold if the price tag is right. And like back in the day when they sold Zidane, I think you can remember that as well. From that point, I think the club said it's not really about who we're selling. It's more about who are we buying instead. So you got Thuram, you got Buffon, you got Nedved, and so on. So I think I would turn back to that phrase again, saying it's not really about if we're selling Bremer or not. It is, if we're selling Bremer, who are we getting instead? And again, that ties into the subject we just had. We need to invest that into players that both is a sustainable option from the club, not a 90 million euro player, but also a player that can support the style of play that the sporting tactics actually decide the way we want to play. So I'm not that concerned if we're selling Bremer, to be honest. Yeah, he's a powerhouse in some situations, but from a team who wants to be on the ball, who wants to build from the back and be very tactical, adapt, I don't see him as the unique player I have to say.
Yeah, I'm with you in that, but my concern is I've been nagging about in a lot of episodes since like Evra and Lichtsteiner time, we don't have any fullbacks. So we have a lot of wingers, but not fullbacks, wingbacks. So you see, if we get rid of Bremer, we get in Calafiori, we got Gatti, as you said, we got Rugani, now we got Thiago Diallo, who's never played for us, but we don't have any wingbacks. So Juntoli is going to have a busy summer if we sell Bremer and get a four-man defense.
Yeah, obviously that's a huge that's a huge issue for the club, not only for Juventus but for any club. That when you make a transition from one style of play into another style of play, that always costs a lot of money, and it takes at least 2 or 3 seasons to fully implement that transition. I think. Well, we have Cambiaso who can play on either back, but full back. But yeah, you're definitely right. You need to let go of Giallo. You need to let go of Di Silio. You need Alexandro is also leaving. So I think from that perspective, yeah, it's going to be a busy summer. I would preferably like that they could bring in 5 or 6 new players and then skip out some of the dead weight they had, some of the mediocre, rather replace them with some very hungry younger players. But if you bring in a coach like Motti, you need to make that transition and say, yeah, but honestly, there's just too much mediocrity in the team now. We're earning too much money, to be honest. So.
Yeah, and you see like Timothy Vea, who was not having a great season, first season at Juventus. You see Mattias Solé in Frosinone, who got double digits in goals. You see Dean Huijsen playing pretty good in Roma. So we got talent on loan. Enzo Baranechea, Caio Jorge, who doesn't make that good in Frosinone, but we have players in our squad and in our team. But do you think we can rely on the younger players for this coming season, or do you think we have to buy a lot of players and sell the talent?
I think it's all about a calculation, actually, to see where you want to go, and that might lead to sacrificing some players. But again, it's really dependent on the coach. I see if a coach like Motta is coming in, I could easily see a player like Soulé having an integral part in that team. But again, I don't see a player like Bremer having an integral part, because that's just not his style of play. So I think selling him and perhaps doing some exchanges with some of the players that really aren't Juve material. I could see a Moretti going to Bologna, for instance, as part of a deal for Calafiori or something like that. So I think it's really down to setting up what is the optimal lineup we need, and where do we need reinforcement in that regard. So I think it would be great to see a younger core at the team, but you also need to acknowledge that's very unstable, having younger players, because that's just how they are, and that's part of the development. So I think the real exercise is actually getting that combination of young talent combined with some very experienced high-level players as well. So I think from that perspective, they could revert back to once Beppe Marotta and Paratici took over. They did the same exercise. They brought in young players, and then players that were more experienced but still on a top level to support that. And I think that's the transition they need to make.
And the last thing before I let you go, we see like Rabiot is going to be a Busman case again. and then we see the Chiesa, who is 1 year left on the contract. What do you think, and what do you want to happen with both Rabiot and Chiesa?
Yeah, I think Rabiot is done more or less in Juventus, and I think it's fine. I don't think I think he has too few peaks in his play. We saw some amazing matches last year with him, but I think it's just been too far between them. So he's not elite top level the way I see it. He's not the protagonist every match that he needs to be in order to have that kind of weight he actually has. I would rather see a younger player taking his role instead. I think Chiesa is waiting to see what's happening on the coaching front. I think he's done with Allegri more or less. So I think that could be a boost for him as well, getting a younger coach that wants to play attacking football. So I think what will happen is that I'm pretty sure they're going to bring in Mota more or less.
Yeah.
And once they do that, I see Chiesa renewing his contract as well. So yeah, so that's my 10 cents.
Yeah, and you got the core of the front in Juventus, because you're talking about the Kenan Gillis, who is going to extend too, like a year after he extended the contract. And we are talking about Vlahovic, who probably is going to extend to with a more spread out salary. So
yeah,
the core of the front is already there.
Yeah, and then you need to get supplements into that, sending out Keane and Milik as well, who hasn't really been anywhere near the shape they need to be in order to play with Juventus. So cash in on those, get their wages off the books, and then try to supplement with younger players like Yildiz or something like that. I think that would be good. Perhaps an experienced striker, who knows, an experienced winger. And then address, I think the immediate need is more around the obviously the midfield, and you already raised some flags around the defense as well, going from a 3-man defense into perhaps, or more likely, a 4-man defense with 2 fullbacks again. That also requires some investments, I think. So.
Yeah, and if we're talking about the midfield quickly, you see if Rabiot is leaving, we can get Locatelli more up as a 8, as a Mesala. But I want a more experienced player like Jorginho to take the Regista part of the midfield, but he's extended with Arsenal now. So do you think we can see Fagioli in that position?
No, I actually see him as an 8 as well.
Yeah.
I think if you look at the approach in, let's say, a 4-3-3, it's not really about the Regista role. It's more like a defensive midfield, and you actually have a couple of options in that part, but it all ties down to creating that kind of balance in the team. So perhaps a more specific defensive role needs to be brought in. Again, it's a transition into another way of playing football, rather than having one Regista creating play. Then you have 2 8s creating play, and then a balancing player in the 6th position instead, that needs to be more like covering the 2 8s. So and again, playing the way we play, we send out Rovella to Lazio. He would be ideal for that role. He's been one of the better players with Lazio, I think, in a disastrous season. But it requires some reinvestments in certain roles, transitioning from that kind of defensive style of play we have now into a more attacking style of play. So
and I think it's been great talking to you, Paul, with the background in both scouting and coaching, and talk about our club Juventus. So lots of thanks for your participation of this podcast.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Great talking to you. So I just do a publish later, and then I took a few quotes from the. I think I'm going to take the quoting on Bremer and the selling of him and put up as well.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, great talking to you, and lots of thanks.
Yeah, and thank you as well. Have a nice day.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye.